Hi everyone, welcome back. All right, so for the third assignment, we're going to be learning about JavaScript. We're going to learn about the syntax and all the different features on how to work with functions and variables and objects, create data, and um, and then once we feel more comfortable and feel confident, we're going to be using those skills to re-implement the Canvas application that we've been working on throughout the semester. We're going to convert that from plain old HTML and CSS into an application that is built on React.js. All right, so up to this point, we have been working with plain old HTML and CSS. We've built quite a few labs that play around with CSS and various Bootstrap components, and as well as implementing Canvas using just regular hyperlinks and plain old HTML that with the form elements and using CSS to style to look like a popular content management system. So what we're going to do is that we're going to re-implement this using React.js. Right? So, but first of all, we're going to have to set up our environment so that we actually use React.js. If you remember, we had kind of broken our application so that we would only be able to work with HTML and CSS. Well, we're going to have to unbreak it, right, and bring it back to being a full-blown React.js application. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to our IDE, and if you remember our index page, we only really have our HTML being rendered here, right? And that we had commented out the div root that's where React.js is injecting its content, right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to comment out everything we've done so far, right? All this code. If you notice now, it doesn't render anything. And we're going to bring back our React.js, which is what it's doing. It's injecting all the content into this div that has the ID root. We'll see in a minute that the JavaScript, what it does is that it grabs this element by its ID, right? And then it renders everything, adds dynamically the HTML content into the DOM, right? Right into this element. So this happens here in the index.js, right? If you remember, we had, I didn't save that. This happens in the index.js in the source directory. And we had commented that out. Right? So let's select that and uncomment it. We save it and we go back to our application. You'll notice that this is the original, out of the box React application. This is all explained in the third assignment, right? It does explain that we're going to bring back the React application by commenting everything else, right, within the body, but uncommenting our root div, right? And then in the index.js, right, we were going to uncomment it, right, and bring back the content to its original form, right? That does the kind of like the magic of grabbing the element by its ID called root, right? And then injecting and rendering the content in that div. So we're going to be using JavaScript from here on, right? But we're going to be using a flavor called JSX, right? Which is a flavor that kind of tries to marry or kind of blur the line between the JavaScript world, right? Here's the JavaScript language here, right? And a language that seems to look like HTML. This is not really HTML, right? It's just has the syntax of HTML, or more generally an XML, which allows to bind XML looking tags, right, and syntax, ties them to functions, JavaScript functions. So for instance, this tag here, this app tag, which is obviously not HTML, it's actually the name comes from this imported function, right, that is imported from this file app, right? That if you go into that app, you'll find that there is a function called app, right? And it turns out that, well, whatever that function returns, right, in this case, something that looks like HTML, whatever that function returns is what this tag eventually renders as, right, or evaluates. So the function of React.js is to go through all these non-HTML tags, right, and call the corresponding functions so that those functions can then render actual HTML. And again, this is looks like HTML, right? But it's a slightly modified HTML, and you'll see, there's a for the most part you can consider it to be HTML, right? But there are a couple of twists and turns, right, that I'll be pointing out throughout the throughout this lecture. So let's do what this says here. We brought back the app, right? We commented it out, and let's look at the content of app, right? So let's so in here, right, we have the code. If we go into app, here's the function, and we're just going to blow out that content. Right? If we do that and we save, you'll notice that if we actually we do have to put something. So we'll have a some div, and we'll soon do a hello there, or hello world, right? And that if you see the rendering, there it is. It says hello world. Notice that the styling probably is picking up from some CSS that we are including in the HTML probably, plus some other CSS that we don't really care for. So we're going to comment that out. Also, any index.js is if any CSS that it's importing, we're going to throw that out. Probably also in the index here, we might be loading some other CSS. Let's see. We have a meta link. There it is. So we have a couple of style sheets here. So I'm going to remove that. We go back. We have just now plain HTML, right, with the default styling. All right, so we have our React application, right, just saying hello world with no styling whatsoever. The assignment goes on to explain how to bring back Bootstrap, right? Installing Bootstrap, installing a couple of other icons, right? Now this part we had done already, right? npm install Bootstrap, but let's just make sure that it's there, right? We can go into the node modules and look for Bootstrap, and indeed it is there, right? And that's all, right? We don't have to move it. We don't have to copy anything, right? That we, in previous assignment, we did copy the distribution CSS and JavaScript into like a vendors or a libs folder. We don't really need to do that when in the React, right? The reason we had to do it when we were working inside of public directory is that these files in here are not allowed to navigate outside of the public directory to go down and grab a reference to Bootstrap. And now, if you reference them from source directory, right, all this code is JavaScript that needs to be compiled or transpiled into a lower level JavaScript, right? This JSX is a high level version of JavaScript that cannot be understood by browsers, right? So it needs to be transpiled or compiled into strings and just plain old JavaScript. So that compiling mechanism, right, fetches any dependencies that might be referenced from node modules, right, and then it copies all that, right, the transpilation and the build process, packages and copies files into the right place, so that we can have references, for instance, to Bootstrap from here. For instance, in the assignment here, I was giving you an example on how you can reference Bootstrap. You can say import Bootstrap, I think CSS, right? And notice that this changed, right? So the font now is given by Bootstrap. Right? The other library that we are suggesting that you install is React Icons. React Icons is a nice library that has tons and tons of really cool icons. So I'm going to paste that. So that's going to install. You can take a look at the library, but if you go to React Icons, oh, there it is. Right. So this is all the libraries of icons that have been kind of merged together into one single library, right? So for instance, you have Font Awesome 5, Font Awesome 6, which we discussed in prior assignments, and here they are, right? But what they've done here is that they've made these into React.js components, right? So you can import them, right, and then use them as components. And I'll illustrate how to do that. But not only do you get Font Awesome, but there's tons of other really cool icons. You have the number. These are the Bootstrap icons. So Bootstrap itself has icons which are also available through here. So I will illustrate how to use these from within our React.js a little later. Okay, so the now we can start working on labs, right? And which is going to be our third assignment. And so what we're going to do is that we're going to create a React.js component called labs, right? That's going to collect all the various exercises that we're going to work out, throughout this this assignment. Learning everything about JavaScript. Okay, so let's do that. So inside of the source directory, we're going to create a labs folder, and in there we're going to create an index.js. So let's do that. So in the source, we're going to create a folder called labs. Oops, labs. And in there, we're going to create an index.js, right? And in here, we're going to create a function called labs that is going to return assignment 1. Assignment 3. We're working on assignment 3. And we're going to export. There it is. Once we have that component, we can then bring it into our app.js. Right? So for instance, we can bring in here assignment labs. Notice that my IDE already knows to import that. And if we go back and see, right, we'll notice that indeed this didn't render. Oh, okay, because the server is not running. So it's started because we had to install a couple of libraries, so we had to stop the server. All right, so it's loading, and there it is, assignment 3. So the assignment had let us kept the hello world in there since it wanted to illustrate the fact that we can break out content into separate files, right? So let's do that. And the assignment does illustrate that instead of having the assignment 3, H1 as part of the labs, right? We can create an independent component that just has all the exercises for assignment 3. This is kind of looking forward later on when we have assignment 4, 5, 6, and so on and so forth, right? So we don't just want assignment 3 here. So we're going to create an entirely new folder, right, that can just host everything that has to do with the assignment 3. So let's do that. So under the labs, we'll create another folder called A3, right? And in there, we'll create index.js, which is going to have our assignment 3 in there. Right? So in here, we're going to have a function, assignment 3, which is going to return, there we go, and then we're going to export assignment 3, and we can go back to labs, right, and just replace this with the assignment 3 component that we just built, right? If we go back and render it, this is going to look exactly the same way, right? Well, plus the hello world that we never removed. Assignment 3 did have a container class, right? Since notice that all these are flush to the edge, right? So the assignment 3 was suggesting that we add that container class here, right? Which we'll see that that it is adding the margins, right? And it's centering the content. We don't see that, but there's a margin here, a margin there. It's not doing it with hello world, right? Because we're only wrapping the assignment 3. Now this looks kind of funny, although we're going to break these out into separate screens, so they're not necessarily all going to render on the same screen. So for now, we're going to keep it like that. Right, so let's keep going. So in the assignment 3, right, we are going to be we're going to be working on several JavaScript exercises, right? But before that, let's I did want to point out that that React.js is promotes the breaking out content into separate components, right? So, for instance, this we did it for assignment 3. We can absolutely do it also for the hello world that we had in there, right? And create its own component. So let's create a hello world component, right? So, for instance, we can create a file called hello world, right? Where in the same assignment 3, right? So in assignment 3, we can create a new file, hello world.js, right? And in there, we'll say hello world, and the content is going to be this this h1. I like to put parentheses in my returns, but my IDE insists that it's not necessary. So if we make a component out of that, we can go back to the labs 3 where we had the hello world. Oh, yeah, I guess we had removed it already. Let's see. So that would be in the hello world app, right? In the app. So if we go to the app here, we can, oh, there it is. Yeah, right. We can remove that and bring in the hello world component back in there. Right, so that's this should render the same way, right? But now this is a component, right? A separate component that where you can calculate the output, right, by doing iterations or for loop or going to a data database or whatever, right? It's not just now just hard-coded H1s, right? Yeah. So we're also going to create a placeholder component for our Canvas application, right? That's for now it's just going to return a heading, right? It's just to say that hey, I'm here. But later on we'll revisit this, and all these will live in separate screens, right? So okay, so let's create a placeholder for this. So here in source, let's create a new folder. We'll say Canvas, and in there we'll create an index file, right? And in there we'll copy this content. And then we can bring it in into the app application. Right now they're all rendering on in the same app.js, but eventually we're gonna make sure that they render in separate screens, and we'll put some navigation. So now you have a canvas there, and we'll come back right to this so that we can navigate to the assignments or navigate to Canvas, right? We'll add some links and whatnot. Okay, so let's start learning about JavaScript, right? So let's create a JavaScript component where we're going to put lots of several exercises, right, that are listed below, right? So under A3, right, we're going to create a JavaScript component, a React.js component under A3. So here, we'll say a new file, JavaScript. Let's copy the content in there, right? And let's bring that component into our assignment 3, our JavaScript into assignment 3. So let's do that. Let's assignment 3. Where is it? Labs A3, assignment 3. There we go. So in there, we're going to bring the JavaScript component. So JavaScript, so that if we see our assignment 3, we'll see that there's a JavaScript subsection that contains all the JavaScript exercises, right? So some of the exercises go through some very simple concepts, like for instance, writing to the console, right? So this exercise just just make sure that you know how to write to the console, right? So which is very useful for debugging and things like that, right? So for instance, in the JavaScript component, we can add a console command, so that when this renders, right, the browser, you can see in the console. So if you inspect and then you go into the console, you'll see what it prints out. Right? So we are printing out, hello world. So if I do go to inspect, right, and I bring my console here, I click on console, you'll notice that indeed, right, this says that you printed hello world, and it says usually it would say also what line is it printed. But yeah, so this is a great debugging tool, right? If you want to see that you are running through a particular spot in your code, or you want to print out the value of a variable, things like that. So a little more interesting exercise, right? Learning about variables. So let's create a component that we can exercise learning about variables. So let's see, under labs, right? We can create a file here, and let's copy the code. So most of the code that we're using, I'm giving you the code for the first couple of exercises, but then I ask you to kind of write it on your own. I can give you code snippets that you can reuse, but I don't give you the whole thing. But here I give you everything. So we're learning about variables. There's a variable that is function scoped by using the var keyword. Let allows you to declare a variable which is scoped in this block here. And then constant things that you can't change, right? Variable or symbol sections you can only assign when they're declared, and then you can't change them anymore, right? So to learn about this, right? I guess we don't need a JavaScript label there, since we already declared it earlier. So we go to JavaScript, we can bring in that exercise, right? So that we can render it there. So let's see. So let's bring variable and constant. There it is, right? Notice that it gets imported automatically. And then if we render it, notice that there it is. Right? So variables and constants, declaring the various variables and constants. Perfect. There's also different variable types. So this exercise just introduces you to various types of variables that are either floating point values, integers, booleans, strings. So let's create a component for that. So we'll do in here. Again, this exercise is mostly you can just copy the content, paste it in there. So make sure that the variables are declared that are used in here. Sometimes they were declared in earlier exercises, and sometimes it assumes that you already have those variables. But apparently not this one. So this one has all the dependencies right here. So then to render it, you can just bring it in and load it up. So there's variables and variable types. The assignment asks you to kind of put it at the bottom of the JavaScript component. I'm putting it at the top so that here is easily to see that it's I just worked on that exercise. Because as I add more exercises, otherwise it would be at the bottom, and then I would have to scroll to the bottom every time. So for convenience, I'm going to put it at the top so they can see that it is working. We have Boolean variables, right? That they're useful, like for when you're doing comparisons or when you're doing predicates, right? And so yeah, so here's an example of an exercise where I'm not giving you the whole code, right? So let's create the component. So you have to kind of fill in the blanks, right, for what I'm not giving you. So for instance, you have to create a function that has Boolean variables, right, that is going to return, right? So it's going to return this, but I need to first declare all these functions. So let's declare these functions and then render them using the return. And then let's see. And then to do the export, right? So don't forget to do the export. There we go. Let's see if this breaks, but let's see. We have number variables, right? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I use this integer, right? So that later on this variable true for, right, references that variable. And so it's checking to see, are these values, right, the number variable, is it triple equal to 1, 2, 3? So what the heck is this triple equal? So yeah, JavaScript has actually three types of equal operators, right? There's the equal, which is in this, the single equal is an assignment operator, right? So it's assigning a value on the right-hand side to a variable on the left-hand side, right? So that one's easy, right? Then you have single equal, which works like the equal as you might expect, right? So this is checking to see, is the left-hand side sort of the same as the value on the right-hand side, right? Um, and so yeah, so okay, here's an example, right? Is is the character 1 sort of the same as the number 1? Well, the double equal would say yes, absolutely, right? That's very error prone, and so it's discouraged to use that operator. Whenever possible, as always, use the triple equal, right? So for instance, this would, with a double equal, this would be true, or how we say in JavaScript, truthy, right? It's sort of true. Right? Whereas if you use a triple equal, these would not be true, would not be the same, right? They would not be equal. And because the triple equal checks to see whether the both sides have the same data type. If they are the same data type, then it goes and compares them. But if they're not the same data type, it doesn't even compare them, right? Anyway, so with Boolean values, it can be true and false. There's operators such as and, right, with a double double. And you have or, you have not, right? And then the comparisons, right? Plus the greater than, less than, all those, right? So here's one checking to see if a number variable is less than 100. So to display them, right? Here's in H2 displaying them, but then there's the text, and then we want to display the actual value, right? And to do that, we use the curly bracket, escape characters, right? That's saying, hey, I don't want the literal string true1. I actually want the variable value, right? So I am this being evaluated, right, to whatever string representation this has, right? And now, if we want the actual text true or false, right, because true has the value of true, to convert it into a string, right, I'm just concatenating to a string so that it renders the word true or the word false, right? So this little trick of concatenating a Boolean variable with a string, right, converts the whole thing into a string, right? So anyway, let's bring in the Boolean variable into the JavaScript exercises. I'm just going to bring it here at the top. There we go. My IDE didn't import it. There we go. Import it. So let's see what this renders as. There it is. So Boolean variable rendering all these values. Okay. So on the left are the names of the variables, and the right are the string representations of the Boolean values. Okay. All right. Okay, let's go on. Have Boolean variables, we can start learning about branches, right, or if statements and whatnot, or if else. Right? So if else allows us to, have obviously create an expression, sometimes often referred to as a predicate. Right, it's an expression that evaluates to either true or false, and then take different actions, whether I'm going to take one branch or the other based on whether a value is true or false. Right? But more interesting, right, is being able to conditionally render something, right? So here we have an expression with the curly brackets that is saying, evaluate the left-hand side. If the left-hand side is true, notice that we have an and operator here, right? If it's true, it evaluates to true, then evaluate the right-hand side. So the keyword true, or the value true or false, does not render, does not add any content. That's why earlier where we had to convert it into a string so that it could actually render as the word true, word false, right? If you convert it into a string. Here it doesn't. We're not converting into a string, right? So it doesn't render. But it is being used as an expression, which, if the left-hand side renders as true, then I'm going to evaluate the right-hand side, which basically adds a paragraph, right? But if this evaluates to false, then the right-hand side does not get rendered. Or more sophisticated, we have the ternary operator, which I believe we have an exercise a little later, that checks to see if the left-hand side is true or false, right? If it evaluates to true, right, then it evaluates the second parameter, right? So it has three parameters. The first one, notice the question mark, right? And then after the question mark, we have a colon, right, that declares two expressions, right? One on the left and one on the right. So if the expression before the question mark is true, then the expression on the left of the colon is returned. But if the expression on the left is false, right, then the colon, the expression after the colon is returned. So this whole thing either evaluates to this or evaluates to that. That's what I'll render, one or the other. Okay. All right, so let's try it out. So let's copy that and let's create a component in here. All right, and we'll need to create a function. So let's copy this. Let's paste it in there. And let's export it. There we go. And then in JavaScript, let's bring it in. So this is the if else, right, in here. And let's see how it renders. Okay, there it is, if else, right? So it evaluated like that because, right, so this is true. This is true one. True one is declared as true. So if it's true, then this renders true one. And there it is, true one. But this is false, right? So false is here is false, and this is not false, so this is true. If this is true, then this gets rendered, not false one, not false one, right? So notice that this paragraph, right, is rendering this text, right? It's not rendering the value of true or false, right? It's just plain text here, right? So yeah. All right, so we also have the ternary conditional operator, right, that we just saw earlier, right, that allows us to create an expression that has three statements, right, or three parts, right, that are delimited by the question mark and the colon, right. So on the left side of the question mark, we have a predicate, right, an expression that evaluates to either true or false. And if it evaluates to true, right, then the whole expression renders to the expression on the left side of the colon. If the predicate is false, then the expression on the right side of the colon, right, is returned. So this whole expression either renders either as welcome or please log in, right, based on whether logged in is true or false, right, which is something we would want, right, if we are navigating to a login page or we're navigating to a home screen, right, and whether we like to be greeted by friendly message, right, if we are logged in. But if we're not, then we would be challenged, right, to log in, right. So let's create a component called ternary operator. So let's see, new, there it is. And so let's see, so let's copy the content. So we'll say function ternary operator. There we go. What do I call it? Ternary? Oh, there we go. And we'll export this. There we go. And so we'll include this in JavaScript. So let's bring it in. So this is the ternary operator. And if we see the rendering, welcome and logged in, right? It says welcome, and that is because, right, logged in is true, right? So it renders welcome, right? If it were false, right? If turnip would be false, let's say false, then this would render please log in. See that? All right, so let's learn about functions, right? So uh, all mature languages or serious languages have a feature where it allows you to collect several statements into a function that you can then invoke and pass parameters. Now, the JavaScript language has gone through several iterations as it has evolved into a more mature language. Now the real name of the JavaScript language is ECMAScript, right? And in 2015, the language had quite a big bump or jump in feature sets, right? And so we refer to as the previous version as ES5, right? And the version right after that in 2015 became ES6, and ES6 has introduced tons of really great features. But let's take a look at some of the differences. In particular, let's look at the legacy or the regular functions, right? Or sometimes we refer to them as the ES5 functions. They're very similar to what you would expect, right? You have the function keyword, then the name of the function, the parameters in parentheses, right? And the body of the function, right? So here's a trivial one where we can call the add function, and it just returns the arithmetic summation of a plus b, and then we use it here, right? And then we can render it. So it's nothing earth shattering. So let's create a component for that, right? Yes, like that, and then create a function, function ES5 functions, right? I'm gonna paste that in there. Now, you can have functions within functions. So this function, I just called it add, right? And it's being invoked here, right, to calculate a value of 2 plus 4. And then it's being called here from within the return statement, right? This one evaluates to whatever that constant was, which added 2 plus 4, so it should be 6. And then this one, right, just writes out the text, but then it evaluates the actual function calls to n4. Right? We should also evaluate to 6, the same thing. Right? So let's include this in JavaScript. So we can say, what was it called? ES5 functions. Oops, like that. And oops, ES5 functions is not defined. Oh, did I not include it? There we go. No. Oh, I never exported it. So export. There we go. Okay, see that? 2 plus 4 is 6, 2 plus, and add 2 and 4 is 6. Yeah, so it works. Now from the 2015, right, when we came up with ES6, there's tons of new features that were added, but in particular, the arrow functions were introduced, right? So this is a new syntax for declaring functions, right, where before you would use the keyword function, the name of the function, parameters, right, and then the body of the function. But now in this new syntax, right, there is no keyword function. And what we actually do is that we have a function expression, right, on the right hand side of this equal sign. Right? So this is declaring or creating a function, right, and that which is being assigned, right, to a constant. Right? So this constant has the value of this function declared on the right-hand side, which we can then use, right, using the parentheses operators to dereference, right, what the value of this constant is, which is a function, right? So this evaluates whatever subtract is assigned to. Right? Subtract has a function assigned to it, so the parentheses, right, dereference that, and then are able to invoke whatever subtract is referencing, right, which is this function, and then use these as the parameters for A and B and do the subtraction. Right? So let's try it out. This new syntax. Let's see. So let's create here a new file, and then let's declare it, function, arrow functions, just paste that in. And then, once you have the function declared, you can invoke it like any other function, right? We're using the parentheses, either from here from the body or from within the return, right? And we display the values there. So let's export this and let's bring it into JavaScript. So this is, what's it called? Arrow functions. So this is arrow functions. There we go. Save that, and this should work as expected. The new ESC arrow functions, right, evaluates the right thing. Perfect. So another feature that was added in the ES6 is called implied returns, right? And implied returns are the values that functions return, right? That that if a function is so simple that that the only thing that it does is that it's returning, like for instance this one, right? This subtract, okay, is a very simple function that the only thing it's doing is that it's returning immediately, right, with a value that's calculated. Well, if that's the case, right, then this function can be rewritten without the return keyword and without the curly brackets, right? So this would become, for instance, no curly bracket, right, and like that, right, and then you can remove the semicolon and the return, right, and this would be identical implementation, right? So let me undo that and leave it there. And we can illustrate that here, right? So let's grab the implied return and file implied return, and we can create a function implied return, and in there let's copy and paste this, like that, right? And oh, it doesn't print. And let's do the export. There we go. And let's return okay, so implied return, so is this supposed to have maybe a div h2 implied return, right? And we're going to display 4 times 5. So 4 times 5 is equal to 4 times 5, right? And let's do a break. And then multiply 4 by 5, right? Multiply 4 by 5 is equal to, there we go, like that, right? So this should render as the assignment asks, right? So it didn't tell you to do that, right? But we've been giving you the return statements all along, right? So you can follow the pattern, right, and do it on your own. So once we have that, we can go back to JavaScript and bring in the implied return. So this is implied return, and there we go, right? Renders correctly. So, but the point of this exercise is to learn, right, that a function, right, if you have just a simple return like that, right, this behaves just the same way, right? We have the 4 times 5, so still 20, right? But the language is making an effort, right, to be very terse, right, to be as compact as possible. So the point of this exercise is to tell you that you can rewrite this, like that, just like that, right? And sometimes you can do this, sometimes you can't. But this is most useful if you are using like a lambda function, where or maybe you're in an iteration, or handling arrays or objects, that you're transforming them, and you want to do a quick computation on that, or parameter or particular portion of the object. Then this would come very handy. Otherwise, I prefer my regular functions, right, with my regular returns. But if it's something trivial like this, then yeah, absolutely. So it renders as expected. There we go. So another cool feature, that, again, in the same theme of the language trying to be more compact, more concise, right, is the optional parentheses and parameters. So, for instance, if you have a function, right, that is already an arrow function that's already has an implied return, right, and so typically you would put parentheses around the parameter list, right? But what this is trying to point out is that if you only have a single parameter, then, right, if it's not confusing, then you can optionally drop the parentheses, right? So let me show you that. So let's create a component for this. There we go, like that, and let's copy and paste the so we'll need a function first, right? So function, like that. We'll bring that in, those couple of variables, and then we're going to return, and it's supposed to display like that, right? So it's function parentheses and parameters. Function parentheses, function parentheses and parameters. Okay. All right. So then we have here a div. What is it? H1, H2. We call it parentheses and parameters. So parentheses and parameters. I can't type. There you go. And then we can display each one of these, right? So let's see, can we grab some of these? So this is square, 2 squared, so 2 squared. There we go. A break. I'm going to display each one of these. So my AI is being nice and displaying all these. 2 squared, 3 plus 1. So square of 2. Oops. There we go, like that. And then plus 1. Let's use plus 1. There we go. Plus 3. It's 4, right? So if we render this over here, we have to bring it into our JavaScript. So what is it called? Function parentheses. So function parentheses, blah, blah, blah. And we'll need to import it. There we go. I never had a default here. Export default. There we go. Right. But the point of this exercise, right, is to learn, right, that if your function is so trivial, right, that has no parentheses, right, it is okay to leave them out. Now my IDE is forcing the parentheses, and that's good for the IDE because it's so much easier to read when you have the parentheses. So it's often considered bad practice not to include the parentheses, right? Much easier to read it with the parentheses. So my IDE is being very strict, right, and adding my parentheses in there. Yeah, so let's learn about arrays, right? So first we're going to declare a few arrays of numbers, right, and include them inside of other arrays or arrays within arrays, right? So let's create a component where we can practice this, right? So let's create the working with arrays, and we'll need to create a component with the function, right? And let's declare some of these variables, okay? And then we're going to want to display them, right? So first of all, we have we have just a few variables, right, and constants, okay? And then we have a couple arrays. This is a little array that has 5 integers, and then we have a string array that has 2 strings. And then here's an example of using a variable that can contain all sorts of different stuff, right? It can contain numbers right here, right? So 2 numbers plus another constant, and then an array that contains another array of integers, and then it contains another string array, right, that has 2 strings. Now to display this, we'll do return. Let's see if my AI creates. There we go. So my AI has nicely created everything I need. I already have a parentheses, and let's do an escape, and let's import this in JavaScript, right? What's it called? Working with arrays. So working with arrays. There we go. And if we render this, there we go. So working with arrays. So notice the way it rendered the integer arrays, right? So we had the array was 1 through 5 with commas in between, and notice that it rendered without the commas. That's actually good, right? Because we'll see a little later that we can use arrays, right, to iterate over them and then create them into content directly, right, without having to, for instance, join or remove the comma. Same thing with these 2 string arrays, right? Plus this variable array, just kind of concatenating a whole bunch of stuff together, right? The function scope was 2, then I concatenated with the block scope, which is 5, so there it is, 25, right? Then constant, so I guess the 2 minus 3 minus 5, which is minus 3. All right, perfect. All right, so yeah, so everything removes all these pesky commas. Right, so the arrays data type has lots of constants or attributes associated to the array, plus has lots of useful utility functions, right? Of which one of the simplest one is just finding whether a particular item is inside of the array. Like for instance, index of returns where is the item, right? And the item is in position 2. This is position 0, 1, 2. Index of 3 will return 2. There it is, right? So let's create that real quick. Let's copy that. And in here we'll say new file, and then so let's create the function. The function, let's see, grab that, and this is function. Let's copy their code, number array, blah blah, blah. Yep. And then we want to display them. The length, right? Length 1 and then index 1. So return Let's see if my AI works. Number array, length one, length, okay, so, yeah, so index of, okay, yeah, so it renders. See, I need to include it in JavaScript. So array so array and length, there we go. All right, so let's see how we can manipulate arrays, like for instance, being able to add or remove data from arrays. Right? So let's create a component for this exercise. So in A3, let's create a new file, right? A JavaScript file, and let's name it adding and removing data from arrays. And let's copy this in there. So in this example, right, we are declaring a number array with 5 elements and then a string array with 2 elements. And then one of them we are adding a 6th element to the array, and the other one we're adding a 3rd string. This is done with the push function, right, on the array, which adds elements to the end of the array. But you can also remove, right, using splice. And splice, you can tell it where to remove it and then how many you want to remove. So for instance, this one removes one item starting at position 2, and this one removes one item starting at position 1. Right? So we can then create a return, right, that displays the resulting arrays. Right? And then we can export it, right, and then bring it to the JavaScript exercise. We can bring in the what was it called, adding and removing data from the arrays, right? And then if we load that, and there it is, from arrays, yeah. There it is. So it's both arrays where we have added, right? And then we have then removed. Here we have removed the 3rd, so it's 1, 2, 4, so it skips over 3. And then we have string 1 and 3 when we don't have string number 2, right? So we're able to add and then remove. Then we have, of course, being able to loop over an array. Right? So again, let's create a component for that in our IDE. Let's see, we can create a for loops component. Right? And in there, let's create a function called for loops that's going to have this content, which declares basically, let's see, declares an array, right? That has 2 elements, and then you have another array. And so here we're going to iterate over the first array, and then we can read from the array 1, right, by using an index, right, and then storing the value in a local constant. And then we can add, basically we're copying from one array to the other, right? We are copying from one, pushing it to the other one, but we're converting the string into uppercase, right? And so let's do a return, it's a render. So we're going to do return, and let's see. Okay, there it is. So it displays both arrays. We have an extra parentheses, and then we have an export. And then let's bring that to JavaScript. So this is for loops. So for loops, there we go. And then we can display it, and there it is, right? Both arrays that we copied, right? One was the lowercase, and the other one is all uppercase. All right, so now let's take a look at the map function. I think it's one of the most important and most useful functions that on arrays that we're going to be using quite a bit throughout the semester, right? And what it does is that it takes an input array, right? And as it iterates over the array, it calls a function that you provide, right? And then calls that function, whatever that function returns, right? Um, it builds a new array, right? That contains all the values of having call that function on every single element, right? So for instance, here you have a number array that has the values 1 through 5, and then you have another function that basically just squares its parameter, so it just multiplies it by itself. So you have map, right, which is going to iterate over the array, number array, and as it iterates, it's going to call whatever function you give it. And so here we have it's calling this function square. So what does it return? Well, for the first value, it returns 1 times 1. So that goes into the squares, and then 2 times 2, and that goes in there, 4. 3 times 3, and then you get 9. And then 4 times 4, you get 16, goes into squares, and so on and so forth. You get to 25. And that's and there it is. Right? So let's try it out. Right? And went to 36. Oh, must be that that I used to have a 6 in here probably. Okay, maybe let's add it there so that it matches the assignment. And then we have these are cubes, right? So it's multiplying a times 3 3 times by itself, right? So anyway, let's run this and see what it comes out to be. So let's create a function here, a file, right? And then let's call the function like that, right? And then let's copy the body, and then let's print it. Let's see what it renders. So, return. There we go. Map function, blah blah blah, and then returns these values. Let's then export it. And then from JavaScript, let's import it. So it was what, map function or something? Yeah, there you go. And let's see what it renders. There we go. So yeah, so number array, that's the original value. The squares is up to 36, right? Yep. And then 216. Okay, so yeah, it goes through all the cubes, right? It goes 1, 8. Oh, huh. I'm not getting the same values. Interesting. 216. Oh, did I? Probably I. Oh, you know what must have been that I had another value of 3 that had been removed. That's why I don't have 3 cubed to 27, then 64, then 125, then 216. Yeah, so I was missing that value. That's fine. So let's learn about JSON stringify. So JSON stringify is a function that is available in the global variable or object JSON, right, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And we're going to learn quite a bit in a bit, but for now, it has functions that allow you to parse objects, right, from a string, right, and convert it into an actual object, or vice versa, right? It allows you to take an actual object or some data type or data representation, data structure, and then convert it into a string, which this is extremely useful, especially like for debugging and things like that. So let's take this really simple example, right? So let's create this JSON stringify, right? And let's create it. And so let's create a function for that name. And so we can create, maybe we have a any data structure that you want to convert into a string, right? And so for instance, we can return here stringify, and it's converting the squares. Now, normally, right, normally would print this as follows. So if you say squares like that, right, and then create a break. So let's see the difference, right? So if we export, and then you bring in the in JavaScript. So this is JSON stringify. Let's take a look at the difference in how it renders. So normally, notice it would render just all the way concatenated, right, without any commas, with anything. But this one actually converts it into something readable, right, including all the special characters like commas and parentheses and squares and whatnot. And so it's useful also for other data types, like for instance, if you declare a Boolean, say constant, I don't know, logged in, right? And then you declare it's true. And so you would, if you want to display it, you would do something like this, you'd think, right? And so you come here and render it. Notice that it doesn't display. It doesn't display because Booleans just don't render, right? It's a logical value. But you can totally stringify it, right? So let's see, you could say, stringify logged in, stringify logged in, and now, right, it does render. You can actually see, because this is the literal representation of the data structure, right, and its current value. So we're going to be using this quite a bit, especially for debugging. If you're going to display something on the screen, especially an object, and you can see the properties and the values and whatnot, and it's very, very powerful. So another very useful function about arrays is the find function. I mean, and there's tons of really very useful utility functions, but the find is does what it sounds like, right? It finds things, objects or values, right, inside of an array, right? It tells you where it is, either the actual value that it finds, or right, it finds the index. We'll see that next, right? So let me illustrate, right? So let's create a component for this, right? And the function. So function, and let's copy the sample code. So yeah, so it's declaring two variables, one with an array and the array of numbers and array of strings. So what this does is that the find takes as argument a function, right? And then for each item, right, it lets you iterate over each item 1, 2, 3, 4. So A takes in 1, 2, 3, whatever, right? And then what you do, what you do is that if you provide a predicate as the body of the function, and if that predicate returns true, that's when the find stops looking, right, and says, "Ooh, I find it. I found the value of A that makes this true," meaning you were looking for 4, right? As you were iterating, you found the particular value of A that made this true, right? And when it does, then it returns the value of the item, in this case, the A. So it returns 4, right? Same thing with string array. We get iterating and looking for A, which is equal to 3. So it'll find that, right? And then it returns the actual value of 3, right? So let's display this. Let's see if there we go, find function. And we'll have to export this and then bring it in to JavaScript. What was the function called? Find function. So let's import that find function. And let's see it. There it is. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And so it found 4 and it found 3. Yep. Now, similarly, you have the find index function that instead of returning the actual value, the 4 and the 3, instead it tells you where is it, right? What is the index where that can be found, right? And let's make this a little more compact. Oh, this is a little bit too long. This doesn't fit. There we go. Make this a little smaller, maybe. There we go. So yeah, so what this does is that it's iterating over that, and when it finds it, instead of returning 4, it finds it where it's found, which is the second index, right? So this is index 0, 1, 2. So it finds it here, it returns as 2. Whereas the string, right, it's looking for 3, so 0, 1, the position 1, right? I guess we could render it, we use the same arrays, I guess, right? So let's copy this, and I guess we can put it at the end here. So those are the index, and then we can display them down here maybe. Let's see, the 4 index and the 3 index. The values are going to be slightly different because I have different content in the array, right? But so I'm looking for 4, that's index 0, 1, 2, 3, so it's 3. I'm looking for string 3, so that's string 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, right? So there it is, so it's 2. All right, so here's another one really useful array function, right, that allows you to compute an array from an input array, right, that is a smaller array, right, that has only a subset of the original array that meets a particular criteria, right? So it filters. So for instance, here we have an input array that we can find all the items, right, that in that array that meet a particular criteria. So for instance, here we're looking for all the numbers that are greater than 2. So as it's iterating, right, it finds which item are greater than 2, so it returns true for those. So it would only return true for 4, 5, and 6 would make it true, right? So that's what you get. Whereas finding the even numbers are the ones that as you iterate, you calculate the modulus, right? And you have no modulus, sure. So that's 0, so it's the even. Whereas it's not, if it's different than 0, then that would be the odd, right? So let me illustrate this real quick, right? And so we can create a file whose function and body are those, right? And then we can return, there you go, like that. And then export, and then bring it into JavaScript. Filter function. I think that was the name. There you go. And so we render it, and there it is. So for instance, all the numbers greater than 2, the even numbers, and then the subset of the odd numbers. Okay. Another very useful feature that was added in ES6 is the template literals, right? Which is it's a new type of strings, right, that uses a different quotation. See that the backticks, right? So JavaScript supports 3 types of quotes, right? You have the double quotes, you have the single quotes, and the single quotes and double quotes are entirely interchangeable, right? They basically behave the same way. Some folks prefer one, the others prefer the other, and you can embed one inside of the other, right? So they don't have any special powers or anything. Nothing's peculiar about them. And if you want to build other strings, right, well, you have to concatenate them using the regular, concatenation operator, right? But sometimes these, when you're building bigger strings from other strings, then that could be very error prone. It's easy to make a mistake. It's also very expensive, right, computationally. So in ES6, they introduced what are called template strings, right, that uses backticks, right, and where you can embed expressions inside, right, and then whatever they evaluate to, right, it is concatenated inside of that string, right, and you can put all sorts of arithmetic operations, ternary operators, right, Boolean expressions, right, or you can just reference variables, and this is a very, very powerful feature in particular because you can also like break the line, right? And if this is a very long string, right, you can break it into multiple lines, and that's something we use very often in a previous assignment, right, where we had this very long HTML string, right, that we can then embed expressions, including functions, right, that evaluated to other uh, parts of the content, right, that can be computed and then embedded into larger concatenated strings, right? So yeah, let me implement this. So let's create a template literal. Let me use that. And so let's see. So let's create a file, right? And then a function where we can copy the body. Right, so notice that this one is embedding just a plain string inside of a bigger string, right? But this one is embedding a ternary operation, right? So this is logged in. It's asking whether it's just true. If it's true, then it includes the yes, otherwise it includes no. So here you have logged in yes or logged in false, right? Based on whether this is true or false. Okay, so let's render this. So we have the return, and let's export, then bring it into JavaScript. What was it? Template literals. So template literals. There we go. And so that renders. Oops. Logged in. It's not declared. Oops. Let's see what's going on. Logged in. And we have logged in. What was it complaining about? Error line 13. Logged in is not defined. Template literal. Logged in. Did I misspell it? Logged in. Oh, I never declared it. As in constant. Is that what it's referenced? Oh, okay. Yes, you're right. All right. So, I found a bug. So let's declare the constant here. There we go. Perfect. So yeah, right. And these are very, very useful. We're going to be using them quite a bit. So the JavaScript language, right, can also work with objects, right, or instances of properties that can be collected together to describe a complex data type, right? And it's referred to as JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation, which has become very, very popular. And so it simply is you use a curly bracket notation where it allows you to aggregate various properties with their own values, and each value can be of different data types, right? Where you have numbers or floating point values, booleans, strings, arrays that contain other objects. So it could be arbitrarily complex, right? And then you can use the dot notation, right, to read or navigate through the data structure, right, to down to each one of the various properties or arrays and whatnot, right? And also here comes the handy the JSON stringify operator that allows us to very easily just display it, in an easily readable format, right? So let me illustrate. Let's create this component. Call it house, and let's create the function that is going to contain this. So let's copy this whole thing, and then let's do an export. So yeah, so we're declaring a house here that has all sorts of properties such as bedrooms, bathrooms, and then an embedded address that has another object. So it's an object, right, that contains another embedded object, right? And that object could contain another object, right? Or an array. Here you have an array that Alice and Bob just bought this house in the city of Rome, right, in Italy. And then here we are just just retrieving or reading the values and then displaying it as a JSON format, right? So let's bring that into JavaScript. So we have house. There it is, like that, right? And then we can render it right here. So yeah, so here's the house, the bedrooms, the bathrooms, and then the data rendered as a pre-formatted. Right, I'm using the pre tag, which pre-formats the string with a non with a console, for instance, console font or courier, right? That um, that is a simple font, right? Yeah. So we're going to be using JSON quite a bit, right, to represent all sorts of data. Another very cool feature added in ES6 was the spreader operator, right? That allows us to easily copy, data from one data structure into another data structure, right? By prepending, three dots in front of the source data structure, like here's the source array one, and we're copying, right, those items in that other source array into a new array, right, by copying the values there. So this ends up being, array two ends up having 1, 2, and 3 right here in front of 4, 5, and 6. And this also works with objects, where you can, declare a source object, right, which can be copied into another object, right? And here we're copying object one onto object two. So all these fields, right, all these properties are being copied over. So now you have, A, B, C declared here, right? And then you have D, E, and F added later. Now, what if both object one and the target object declare the same fields? For instance, here you have B2 and you have B4. Well, it turns out that if you copy over first object one, and there it is, so you have A1, B2, C3 copied over, but then you have B4 declared right after it, right? This is going to override whatever previous declaration you had or value you had for B. So the resulting is that you have this B ends up being 4, right, in object 3. Right, so let me illustrate. So let's copy. Let's create a component. It's called spread. So let's see, new file, spread, right? And the name is spread for the function. So it's function spread, which actually we can just copy the whole thing, right? There you go. And so then we display both arrays to see what the original values were, and we also display the resulting objects, right, from the source object one, right, and then the resulting target objects 2 and 3 having been modified using object one, right? So let's put this into JavaScript. So this is spread. Like that, and then let's see the content. So there it is. So the object spread. You see that 1, 2, 3 were added to the beginning of 4, 5, 6. You could also put this at the end here or in the middle, and it'll be copied, wherever you end up putting the array 1, right? So notice here we have a object 1, right, has A1, B2, B3, right, which is what you expect, right? And then the object 2, you have A1, B2, C3 copied in front, and then the rest of the other properties in there. Whereas notice the object 1, we copy these, A, B, C, which used to be B2, but we have another B4, right, which collides with the previous B, and so it ends up winning over the original one. Okay. Another very powerful feature added to in ES6 was the destructing functionality, right? That it's a new syntax which is much more compact, right? That allows you to rewrite the same logic, but in a much more concise way, right? Now it's also applicable to objects as well as arrays, right? So let's take a look at an example, right? So let's create destructing. Destructing as opposed to constructing, right? So just like constructing puts together properties into one, right? Here we have something that is breaking or bringing them apart, right? So destructing. Oops. Let's paste that. So let's take a look at that. So here we have an object on the right-hand side that has a whole bunch of properties: names, age, first name, last name, address, blah blah blah, and we are assigning it to person, right? Now, what if you wanted to retrieve the name of the person, right, and then the age? You would typically do person dot name and then person dot age, right? But notice the curly brackets on the left side of the equal sign this time around. Notice if you put it on the right-hand side, you are constructing, right, an object with various properties. Now, if you put the curly brackets on the left side, you are destructing, right? Basically, you are retrieving items inside of the persons, right? And these are it. These are names. So these two are being retrieved, right, or destructed from the person object. So this is basically declaring two new constants called name from the person.name property. So name gets John and age gets 25. See that? Now this works too for arrays, right? Where you can construct an array using the regular square bracket notation on the right hand side of the equal sign, right? But you can also destruct this array by putting on the right hand side, and then on the left side use the square brackets on the left side that basically destructs or retrieves the item by its position, right? So first is in the first position, so it gets the value of the first position. Second is in the second position, so it gets 2, and then third gets 3. Yeah. Again, this is very useful, very, very powerful, and we're going to be using this quite a lot in React.js, right? So there's a chance for you to practice this skill, right, and learn how to use it right before you are asked to actually use it. So let's see how it renders. So there it is. So we have, extracting the name and the age from John, right? And we have the values name and name and age destructed from the original object. And same thing for the array, right? We are retrieving those values, right? And then they are rendered here. There's also something called the function destructing, right? That works when you are passing parameters to a function. Right? So, for instance, here we're passing an object to this function subtract, which has properties A and B. Right? So this notation of using curly brackets inside of the parameter list, right, what it's doing is that it's destructing the object parameter that you're passing as an argument to the function, and retrieving the properties A and B from that object that is being passed as an argument, right? So here's where we're passing subtract. We're passing an object. There it is. See that? With properties A and B. And then when the actual function receives the object, it destructs the value of A, assigning it to its local constant, which is 4, right? And then declaring a local constant B, which retrieves the value from the second property in the object that is being passed as a parameter. So let's create a function for this. So this would be function. Again, this is very common skill that we're going to be using to create React.js applications, right? So let's include that. So there's function destructing. Function destructing. There we go. There it is. So there's add, and we can just pass arguments like we normally can, right? Just individual parameters, and this will work just fine, right? If you're adding 1 plus 2, you have 2. But this one, notice that it's not declaring its parameters individually, right? Instead, they're being declared instead of this curly bracket. So it's an object, right? It's expecting an object of with properties A and B. If it doesn't, then these would be undefined, right? But we are here indeed passing an object to subtract with properties A and B, right? Which are going to be associated to these properties in the object parameter list, right? And then it works just the same, right? So we're passing, 4 minus 2 gives you 2.